We're less than 4 months from the US elections. And one thing we should have learned by now is that during this paradigm shift, things can change dramatically and drastically and suddenly in virtually a nanosecond of time. What is today is not what was yesterday and unlikely tomorrow. The game of life has changed, the rules unknown, and the instruction manual only a book of blank pages. And yet, by means of the tool of astrology, we can get a sense of the energies operating and how things are likely to unfold. We might not fully understand what is specifically going to occur, but we can get a sense of what may be going on. The conditions in the environment in which we may find ourselves, and the areas in our lives where we are likely to be tested, and the areas in which we are likely to be given opportunities, the blessings and the blights in doing life. People have asked my perspective on the 2020 election. To address the vehemence of both political sides and the possible reaction to my forecast, I want to say that I have no horse in this race. I tend to vote third party. Ran for the US House back in 2000 as an independent. I'm not a partisan or a fan of either of the two major political parties. One thing I emphasize regarding the election of 2020 is the fact that there is a similar energy occurring on election day, November 3rd, 2020, as that on election day in 2000. On both of these two election days, Mercury turned from retrograde to direct motion. Whether we are versed in astrology or not, we are likely to be familiar with Mercury retrograde, which is akin to Murphy's Law, where whatever can go wrong could go wrong. The returns for the presidential election on election day 2000 had the results shifting from a win for Gore to a win for Bush, and at the end of the election, total confusion and lack of clarity. The final result of the US presidential election in 2000 was ultimately determined by one vote, that of US Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. The 2020 election suggests something similar, results that might not seem to be clearly delineated. One clear thing about the 2020 US presidential election is the fact that not everyone is going to be happy or even satisfied with the results. Allegations from the losing candidate's side that the election was stolen are likely, and one can list any number of possible culprits. Voter fraud, dead voters coming back to life to vote, voter suppression, vote harvesting, foreign interference, intended software malfunctions, and any number of issues that call into question the legitimacy of the presidential election's results. 2016 was not the first time that the US elections were called into question and accused of some type of malfeasance. In 1960, the narrow victory in Illinois for John F. Kennedy over Richard Nixon was alleged to have been thanks to the illicit efforts of Chicago Mayor Richard Daley's political machine. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the 36th US president, was called Landslide Lyndon due to his 1948 primary win for a US Senate seat, when his initial loss turned into an 87-vote win, thanks to an additional 202 votes found. Some of those voters already dead and buried, others absent from their county polling locations on election day. All these 202 found voters apparently voted in alphabetical order, signed their names in the same ink, all had the same handwriting, and all voted for Lyndon Johnson. Elections in the US have a long history of deceit and corruption and malfeasance. Accusations lodged against 2016 are but a more recent case of a long list of corrupted US elections. Although nothing is set in stone, and far less likely now during these most disruptive times than in the past, we can become aware of the energies operating in someone's life and at a particular time through the tool of astrology. Each person, entity, organization, and event all have an astrological chart. A US presidential administration's chart is derived by the date, time, and place determined by the 20th Amendment to the US Constitution. The incoming administration will be inaugurated on January 20th, 2021 at 12 noon in Washington, D.C. The administration inaugurated in January of 2021 has a strong influence of Aquarius, with 4 planets in Aquarius and 3 planets in Taurus. A push-pull between forging ahead into new frontiers while restrained by the desire for stability and security. This forthcoming administration would seem to be highly innovative, looking to bring about radical change, and fully enlist the advances in technological development. At the same time, the sense of stability and security could be lacking, with many people opposed to administration policies. Protests, even to the point of violent actings out, are liable to confront the administration. The financial world may be somewhat rocked, with old industries giving way to the new. Fiat currency giving way to a renewed gold standard and/or the greater adoption of cryptocurrencies. At this stage, in July of 2020, the Republican nominee appears to be Donald Trump and the Democrat nominee, Joe Biden. But as I mentioned before, things can change suddenly and dramatically in a nanosecond or less. Will these 2 individuals be the nominees of their respective parties? It would seem as though Mr. Trump is gearing up for re-election, but the concern about Mr. Biden's mental clarity or possible mental deterioration could raise the specter of a party nominee switch. And will Mike Pence be the vice presidential nominee on the Republican ticket? Or could there be a switch with a woman replacing the vice president, a woman such as South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem? Presidential re-election campaigns have seen the vice president switched out before, and Trump might look to garner more of the women's vote, a demographic unfavorable to him, by selecting a woman as this year's running mate. And what about Biden? Will he be the Democrat nominee? And if so, what woman, and possibly a woman of color, will he choose? Both Trump and Biden seem to have health issues, another factor that might unexpectedly impact this presidential election. There are still many variables that have yet to be clarified in regard to the presidential ticket of the 2 respective major political party nominees. And I shall take another look at the presidential election at the end of August, when both political parties have determined their respective nominees for both the presidency and the vice presidency. As evidenced back in 2016 and again this year, the Democrat nomination process had its own shifts and changes from the party rules. In 2016, indications have shown that the Democratic National Committee, despite affirming its neutrality, provided significant support to Hillary Clinton to the detriment of Bernie Sanders. Again, in 2020, Bernie Sanders had victory snatched from him by the various candidates who dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden just prior to Super Tuesday. With Elizabeth Warren still in the race on Super Tuesday, and whose voters would otherwise likely have gone for Sanders, the DNC seemed to once again deep six Bernie Sanders. No matter what the rules might say or how the primary voters indicate, the DNC can and do change the rules without a moment's notice. We saw that with the exclusion of Tulsi Gabbard from the last debate, despite the fact that she had won a delegate, which according to the previous DNC rules entitled her to be on the debate stage. Sorry, Tulsi, the game changed, the rules altered. Whether Biden is the eventual Democrat nominee in this year's presidential election or not, it would seem as though Trump may prove to be the eventual winner of this year's election. It may take some time for that result to be confirmed, and one has to wonder whether, like 2000, the result will be finally determined by the US Supreme Court. One of the reasons I believe Trump to be reelected is the fact that his aspects, his energies, are far better in 2021 than they have been during 2020. Certainly, the impeachment of Trump in 2020 was not unexpected, based upon his energies, and even this autumn would seem to bring up more allegations, more threats of impeachment. Should we say one more time with impeachment or the threat of impeachment? Despite the Mercury retrograde turning direct on Election Day, other energies on Election Day seem to favor Trump. Election Day has the moon in Gemini, the sign in which both Trump and Pence have their natal sun. The moon's transit through Gemini on Election Day will beneficially hit off Trump's Uranus, Jupiter, and Sun, and signal a new beginning for him. Both Trump and Pence seem to have better energies in 2021. Another reason that I believe Trump to be elected in 2020, and a discouraging one at that, is the likelihood of increased violence and resistance to the next administration. The next administration does not seem to be a popular one, and there can be a great deal of outpouring of anger, resistance, and violence in response to the election result and into 2021. It's hard to imagine that such vehemence would greet the administration of a Democrat, although like a snowball going down the mountain and gaining momentum to become an avalanche, the protests and rioting when started may only fuel the fires of revolution against the next administration, whoever heads that administration as chief executive or as the president. A third reason that I believe that Trump is likely to be reelected is that the energy configurations of some of the significant Democrats go south and turn increasingly difficult in 2021 and 2022. If Biden is the actual Democrat nominee, then the Democrats are going with an establishment, old school Democrat, and some of the Democrat luminaries of the past would seem to shine if he were elected. But the energy configurations for Obama, the two Clintons, and even Biden himself point to a tarnished time for them. Both Jupiter and Saturn moving into Aquarius will oppose both Obama's and Bill Clinton's sun, while both will square the suns of both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. With Uranus and Taurus, these four major Democrat luminaries will have to suffer a fixed sign T-square, which has the effect of feeling like every which way but loose. Past issues may challenge each of the four with truth to the old saying that the chickens come home to roost. Although I have grave concern for the response and reactions to the ultimate presidential election outcome, the violence and acting out and attempts at violent revolution may be quelled in the second half of 2021. There is a revolution occurring, but the revolution may be more along the lines of technological innovation and development, which bear the hallmark of the information age, rather than the violent outburst and statue dragging that has gone on recently. The times, they are changing. Many of our traditional formats in the economy, in education, in healthcare, and business practices have changed significantly as a result of a virus contagion. The traditional formats and the old normal will not be coming back. We are crossing the threshold into a new frontier. The question as to whether a traditional stalwart or a mercurial individualist will lead us there would seem to be answered in the next administration's chart as being Donald Trump rather than Joe Biden. I'm going to revisit the upcoming election as the players for the two major parties are resolved and in place at the end of August. Just as there are liable to be many people discouraged and disgusted by this year's presidential election results, I'm also certain that there are more than a few people discouraged and disgusted by my presidential election forecast. Now, if you would like to donate to my research and my efforts, please do so through PayPal at frankdon@mac.com, that's FRANKDON@mac.com, or through Venmo at Frank, FRANK, -Don, DON-1. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have found this of interest.